The Galactic Empire was a giant that stretched across the stars. For thousands of years, its banners had flown over countless worlds. Entire species had been crushed into submission. Civilizations that once dreamed of freedom now bowed their heads in silence. No one dared to stand against the Empire, for those who did were erased from history. The Emperor sat on his throne, surrounded by councils, generals, and admirals. His empire was vast, his fleets endless, and his pride unshakable. To him and to his people, no enemy could ever rise strong enough to challenge their rule. The galaxy belonged to the Empire. That was the truth all had learned to accept. But then came whispers of a new species. Strange reports arrived from the outer sectors. Merchants spoke of humans, a young race from a small blue planet called Earth. They had spread quickly, building colonies on nearby worlds, and even beginning to form a fleet of warships. At first, the Empire ignored them. What threat could a small and untested race pose? When the first human explorers made contact with Imperial patrols, the Empire laughed. The humans spoke boldly, but their ships looked fragile, their technology crude compared to Imperial standards. The admirals joked during their meetings. "These humans are like children who just learned how to walk among the stars," they said. "Let us swat them down before they imagine themselves warriors." So the Empire sent scouts. Not entire armadas, but small fleets meant to test the humans and bring back reports. Those fleets never returned. At first, excuses were made. The patrols must have been caught in a storm of plasma. Perhaps their engines failed. But as more and more ships disappeared near human space, the laughter in the council chamber grew weaker. Eventually, survivors returned, broken ships, damaged beyond repair, crawling back to the Empire's borders. And with them came stories that made even the most arrogant admiral fall silent. They fought with fire in their eyes, one captain reported, his voice trembling as he stood before the Emperor. "Their ships are smaller, yes, but they move like hunters. They do not fight like we do. They do not fight with fear. They fight with rage, with cunning. They strike from nowhere, disappear and strike again. My lord, they are not afraid to die." The chamber had been filled with whispers. Some laughed nervously, others frowned. But the Emperor silenced them with a single wave of his hand. His golden eyes glared at the frightened captain. "Do you mean to say, Captain," he asked slowly, "that your fleet of Imperial warships was defeated by these humans?" The captain bowed his head. "Yes, my lord. We thought it would be easy. But they destroyed us." The Emperor's voice thundered across the hall. "Impossible." Yet in the silence that followed, none dared to challenge the captain's words. The truth was clear. Something was different about this young species. Something that unsettled even the most hardened veterans of the Empire. Still, pride is a dangerous thing. The admirals, red-faced with shame, declared that the humans had only won through tricks and luck. "One real fleet," they said, "and these humans will fall." So the order was given. The 9th Imperial Armada would be sent to Earth. Thousands of warships, dreadnoughts, and carriers. Enough firepower to crush an entire rebellion in a single campaign. The Emperor himself declared, "This will not be a war, it will be a lesson. These humans will learn their place." Yet behind the proud words, unease lingered in the air. Why had those smaller fleets failed so completely? Why had humans resisted so fiercely when others always bent their knees? No one spoke these questions aloud, but in the quiet corners of the palace, whispers spread like smoke. For the first time in centuries, the Empire prepared for war with uncertainty in its heart. They believed victory would come swiftly, as always. But in truth, they had no idea what awaited them beyond the stars of Sol. They thought they were marching to an easy conquest. They thought they had seen the strength of mankind. But the truth was darker and far more dangerous. The Empire was about to learn what it meant to face humanity. The 9th Imperial Armada was one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. It had crushed rebellions, erased worlds, and burned civilizations that dared to stand against the Empire. To send it against the humans seemed almost cruel, like using a hammer to break an insect. The fleet was vast, thousands of ships gliding through the darkness of space. Dreadnoughts the size of cities led the way, flanked by cruisers, destroyers, and carriers filled with fighters. At the center of it all was the pride of the Empire, the dreadnought Crown of Fire, a vessel so powerful it had ended wars by its presence alone. The admiral of the Ninth Armada stood tall on his command deck. His name was Xylan Vortha, a man who had never tasted defeat. He looked at the star map before him, a red circle drawn around a small yellow sun. That was the humans' home system, Sol. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered coldly. "By the end of this campaign, the humans will kneel, or they will burn." The Armada moved like a storm, swallowing the void as it advanced. Days later, they reached the borders of the Sol system. At first they expected no resistance, but as they drew closer to Mars, their sensors lit up. Ships, human ships, were waiting. To the eyes of the Imperials, the sight was almost laughable. The human fleet was small compared to theirs. Their ships looked light, their hulls thinner, their numbers fewer. The Imperial officers smirked. "Pathetic," one sneered. "They have come to die." The Admiral nodded. "Advance. Destroy them quickly." The first battle began. The humans did not fight like any enemy the Empire had ever faced. Instead of charging headlong, they moved with cunning speed. Their ships darted in and out of formations, firing weapons that were strange and unpredictable. They used the planets and moons for cover, striking from behind shadows. A human frigate appeared suddenly from the orbit of Phobos, firing everything it had into an Imperial cruiser before disappearing into the darkness. Fighters swarmed in patterns the Imperials had never seen before, weaving through defenses and attacking weak points with shocking accuracy. The Admiral frowned. His ships were larger, stronger, and armed with weapons that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. But somehow the humans kept tearing holes in his lines. The battle dragged on for hours, then days. Human ships fought with a ferocity that stunned the Empire. When one ship was destroyed, another would ram the enemy, sacrificing itself to cripple a dreadnought. Crews refused to surrender even when surrounded. They fought to the last breath. Imperial officers grew uneasy. Losses were mounting faster than they expected. Cruisers that should have lasted days in battle were falling within hours. The humans were not breaking, they were adapting. Every mistake, every lost ship, seemed to make them stronger. By the third day, the laughter in the Imperial fleet had vanished. The Admiral stared at the growing wreckage of his once proud armada. His voice grew harsher, his orders more desperate. "Push forward! Break them!" he shouted. But no matter how many times the Empire advanced, the humans struck back harder. Finally, after a week of blood and fire, silence fell. The space around Mars was filled with the shattered remains of Imperial warships. Where once thousands had stood, only a fraction remained. The mighty Crown of Fire itself had been crippled, its engines burning, drifting helplessly in the void. The Eye. Surviving Imperial ships fled in shame, limping back to safer space. For the first time in centuries, an Imperial armada had been defeated. The galaxy would whisper about it for years to come. And in the ruins of the battle, the humans stood victorious. Their fleets were battered, their losses heavy, but their spirit remained unbroken. They had faced the largest enemy they had ever known, and they had not only survived, they had won. In the silence of his ruined flagship, Admiral Vortha whispered in disbelief, This was only their beginning?" The truth was dawning, but the Empire refused to accept it. They still believed this was humanity's full strength. They still believed the worst was behind them. They had no idea that the humans had only just begun to fight. The Ninth Imperial Armada was gone. What was once a fleet of thousands had been reduced to wreckage scattered across the blackness of space. The pride of the Empire, the unstoppable force that had crushed entire civilizations, was no more. The news spread like fire through the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Empire had been defeated. Some species whispered in secret, daring to hope. Others dismissed it as rumor, afraid to believe the impossible. But for the humans, it was truth. They had faced the storm and survived. Only a few Imperial ships managed to escape the slaughter. They limped back into Imperial territory, their hulls scarred, their crews broken. These survivors carried not only shame but also fear. They had looked into the eyes of humanity and seen something the galaxy had forgotten long ago. When the battered ships reached the throne world, the survivors were brought before the Emperor and his council. The great hall was filled with tension. Generals, admirals, and lords leaned forward to hear the testimony. The air was thick with disbelief. An officer, pale and trembling, stepped forward. His uniform was torn, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He bowed deeply before speaking. "My Emperor, we fought the humans with all our might. We sent everything against them. But they," his voice cracked, "they fought like demons. They refused to yield. Even when surrounded, they kept attacking. Even when dying, they struck at us." The council erupted in anger. "Lies!" shouted one admiral. "Excuses for your failure," another barked. But the officer's voice grew louder, desperate to be heard. "No, my lords, you do not understand. This was not their full force. We believed we faced their entire fleet, but it was only a fraction. Not all their colonies had joined the fight. Not all their ships had even arrived. What destroyed us was only part of what they can bring." The hall fell into stunned silence. Even the Emperor leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing. "Are you saying," he asked slowly, "that this resistance was not their true strength?" The officer swallowed hard. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, my Emperor. If they gather their full armies, then even more of us will die." Murmurs spread across the chamber. Some looked shaken, others scoffed, unwilling to accept such words. The Empire had ruled for millennia. How could a young race barely stepping into the stars challenge such power? But the survivors stood firm. Another captain raised his voice. "I watched with my own eyes, my lord. They fight with something I have never seen. Not just weapons, but will. They are not afraid of us. They are not afraid of death. And that makes them dangerous beyond measure." The Emperor rose from his throne, his cloak sweeping across the marble floor. His voice thundered. "Enough! The Empire does not fear insects. If this species dares resist, then we will crush them. We will send more fleets, greater fleets. Let them see what true power is." The council roared in agreement, their pride refusing to bend. Yet deep within their hearts a seed of fear had been planted. The warning of the survivors could not be ignored. When the meeting ended, whispers spread through the palace halls. Servants, guards, even minor officials repeated the same question again and again. If that was not their full strength, then what will happen when humanity truly rises? The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. For the Empire, it was a moment of wounded pride. For the humans, it was only the beginning. And in the darkness of space, fleets were already gathering. Humanity was preparing, not for survival, but for victory. The survivors had spoken the truth. The worst was yet to come. Far away from the grand halls of the Empire, humanity was preparing for what was to come. The victory at Mars had been glorious, but it had also been costly. Many ships were destroyed, many lives were lost. Yet even in their grief, the humans stood taller than before. For the first time, they knew they could fight the might of the Empire and win. On Earth, in the war councils hidden beneath mountains and oceans, the leaders of humanity gathered. Holograms of star maps filled the rooms, glowing red with the expanding lines of the Empire's fleets. Around the table sat admirals, generals, and representatives from every colony. Their faces were tired, but their eyes burned with determination. Admiral Hayes, the Supreme Commander, spoke firmly. "The Empire believes they fought our full strength. They are wrong. What they faced was only volunteers, colonies that rushed to defend us. The truth is, we have not yet unleashed all that we have built. If the Empire returns, we will show them what humanity truly is." Across the colonies, preparations began. On Mars, shipyards glowed bright with the fire of forges. building warships faster than ever before. On Titan and Europa, miners dug deeper into the frozen ground, pulling rare metals to fuel the fleets. On the far colonies beyond Proxima, engineers worked day and night to design new weapons. But humanity was not alone. Their defiance had sparked something greater. For centuries, dozens of smaller species had lived in chains under the Empire. They had watched their world stripped, their people enslaved, their hope stolen. When they saw humanity rise against the impossible, they felt something stir within them. Courage. One by one, envoys arrived at Earth. Small ships carrying representatives of oppressed species landed in human cities. Some were weak, their numbers few, their technology outdated. Yet they carried with them gifts, resources, soldiers, and knowledge. They swore loyalty not to conquerors, but to allies. A frail alien, leader, his body scarred by years of imperial slavery, stood before the human council. His voice shook with emotion. For so long we believed resistance was impossible. But you humans, you have given us hope. We will fight at your side. If you can stand, then so can we. The humans welcomed them, not as servants, but as partners. This alliance was not built on fear, but on trust. It was something the Empire had never understood. In secret, fleets began to gather in hidden systems. Warships new and old, human and alien, were brought together under a single banner. Commanders spoke to their crews with fire in their voices. We are not fighting for glory. We are fighting for freedom, not just ours, but for every world that has suffered under the Empire's chains. Families on Earth and the colonies prepared, as well. Mothers kissed their children goodbye as fathers marched to join the fleet. Young cadets, barely trained, volunteered eagerly, saying, "If humanity must fight, then I will not stand aside." Tears were shed. But behind those tears was pride. The Empire thought it knew war. It thought it knew the limits of humanity. But it had never seen what humans could do when pushed to the edge. In the silence of deep space, fleets of black steel grew larger every day. Each ship carried not just weapons, but the spirit of an entire species. A spirit that refused to be broken. Admiral Hayes looked out from the window of the command station, watching rows of warships form against the stars. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of destiny. They will return with fire, but when they do, they will see the truth. Humanity fights hardest when cornered, and this time, we will not fight alone. The storm was coming, and humanity was ready. The Emperor did not sleep after hearing the reports of the Ninth Armada's destruction. Pride and anger burned inside him like fire. His empire had never known defeat, and now a young, untested species had humiliated him before the galaxy. He could not allow it. He would not allow it. In the throne hall, his voice thundered across the chamber. The humans believe themselves strong. They believe they can defy the will of the Empire. Then let us show them what true power looks like. I will not send one armada. I will send 3. Let humanity be buried under the weight of our fire. And so it began. The 3rd, 4th, and 7th Imperial Armadas were summoned from across the stars. Together they formed the largest fleet the galaxy had seen in centuries. Dreadnoughts, battleships, carriers, and destroyers, tens of thousands of vessels, assembled in the dark. It was not a campaign. It was an extermination. When the fleets departed, whole star systems trembled at their passing. Civilizations watched in fear as the endless wave of Imperial ships moved toward human space. Some prayed for the humans. Others whispered that humanity's time was already over. The first strike came swift and merciless. Human outposts on the edge of their colonies were wiped away within hours. Entire moons burned under the fire of Imperial cannons. Planets were shattered, their skies filled with smoke and ash. The Empire wanted to make an example, to show humanity that resistance meant annihilation. But the humans did not surrender. They fought with everything they had, even when the odds were hopeless. At one colony, when the defenses fell, civilian ships rammed Imperial cruisers. sacrificing themselves to buy time for others to escape. On another world, soldiers fought until their weapons melted, using their bare hands against the invaders. Reports of such resistance spread quickly through both sides. For the Empire, it was unsettling. For the humans, it was inspiring. Each act of defiance fueled the will of the next. Admiral Hayes stood before the human fleet, his face lit by the glow of tactical displays. His officers reported loss after loss, but he did not falter. "They are trying to break us," he said calmly, "but they do not understand. Humanity does not break. We bend, we bleed, but in the end, we rise stronger." Battles raged across multiple systems. Some the Empire, one with overwhelming force. Others the humans turned into traps, ambushing fleets and striking from asteroid fields. Every retreat was not weakness. It was a lesson. Every defeat taught the humans how to fight even better. Still, the cost was heavy. Families on Earth and the colonies received news of loved ones lost. Cities burned. Entire fleets vanished in fire. There were moments when it seemed the Empire's shadow would consume everything. And yet, hope did not die. Because even in the darkest hour, humans looked to the stars and remembered the truth. They were not fighting alone anymore. Allied fleets, though small, joined the struggle. Alien soldiers who had once lived as slaves stood side by side with humans, determined to bring down the Empire that had crushed them for generations. The Empire expected submission. Instead, it found resistance. The harder it pressed, the stronger humanity's fire burned. At the edge of the Proxima system, as the largest battle yet prepared to unfold, Admiral Hayes spoke to his fleet. His voice carried across thousands of ships to millions of soldiers. "Today we fight not just for Earth, not just for our colonies, but for every world that dreams of freedom. The Empire believes this war will end with our destruction. But they are wrong. This war will end with our victory." The humans had taken their place in history. The Empire thought it was crushing a rebellion. In truth, it had awakened a storm, and that storm was just beginning to rise. The war had dragged on, leaving scars across the stars. The Empire burned colonies, shattered defenses, and left entire systems in ruins. Yet, despite their fury, they had not broken humanity. Instead, every loss had hardened the humans, teaching them how to fight, how to endure, and how to strike back even stronger. The decisive moment came at Proxima Centauri. It was there the Empire gathered its fleets for a final crushing blow. The 3rd, 4th, and 7th Armadas surrounded the system like a tightening noose. Their ships filled the void, stretching across the stars like a wall of steel and fire. Admiral Siran of the Empire stood on his command bridge, his pride shining as he gazed at the thousands of ships under his control. He sneered at the human defenses gathered near the small colony world. "Pathetic," he muttered. "They will not escape this time." The human fleet seemed small compared to the Empire's endless wave. Their ships, scarred from past battles, floated in tight formation. Soldiers whispered their goodbyes to families, believing this might be their last stand. But their hearts were steady. They knew why they fought. In the command ship Resolute, Admiral Hayes looked over his officers. His voice was calm, steady as steel. "They think this is our end," he said softly. "But today we show them the truth. Today humanity rises. When the Empire advanced, the battle began with thunder. Dreadnoughts unleashed firestorms that lit up the void. Human ships shook under the bombardment, but they did not retreat. Instead, they answered with precision strikes, hitting weak points and drawing the enemy deeper. Hours passed, and the Empire believed victory was certain. Then, suddenly, alarms screamed across their fleets. From the shadows of the asteroid belt, hundreds of hidden warships uncloaked. Reinforcements, human ships long kept in reserve, charged into battle, and they were not alone. Allied fleets appeared beside them, vessels of species the Empire had oppressed for generations. Some were old and fragile, others newly built, but all fought with fire in their hearts. The Empire had thought them broken, but humanity's courage had given them strength. The sky over Proxima Centauri turned into chaos. The Imperial lines broke as wave after wave of unexpected attackers crashed into them. Fighters swarmed through the gaps, bombers struck at dreadnoughts, and alien warships rammed Imperial cruisers with desperate fury. On the Imperial flagship, panic spread. "More ships?" shouted one officer. "Impossible. We destroyed their strength already." Admiral Zyron's face turned pale as he watched the battlefield shift. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "This cannot be real. This cannot be all of them." Across the comms, a human voice answered, calm but sharp as a blade. It was Admiral Hayes. "You think this is everything we have? You think you've seen humanity's full force? No. This is only the beginning." The words struck harder than any weapon. Fear spread through the Empire's ranks. The humans and their allies pushed forward with unstoppable determination. Ships sacrificed themselves to protect their comrades. Damaged vessels charged into enemy formations, detonating in blinding flashes. Every loss seemed only to ignite the fury of those still fighting. The Empire, for the first time in living memory, found itself overwhelmed. Their fleets, built on arrogance and fear, began to collapse. Commanders screamed orders that went unheard, as their ships exploded one after another. In that moment, the galaxy witnessed the impossible, humanity and its allies breaking the chains of history. For centuries, the Empire had been unchallenged, but at Proxima Centauri, it stumbled. As the hour battle raged on, soldiers on both sides knew this was more than a fight for one world. It was the turning point. A moment when the future itself shifted. Humanity had shown its true face, not a fragile species clinging to survival, but a force of will that no empire could crush. And the Empire, for the first time in 1,000 years, felt terror. The Battle of Proxima Centauri ended in fire and silence. Where once the sky had been filled with the proud banners of the Empire, now only wreckage drifted, broken hulls, shattered engines, and the cold remains of thousands of warships. The greatest fleet the galaxy had seen in centuries lay destroyed. We, survivors of humanity, stood scarred but unbroken. Their ships were battered, their crews exhausted, but their spirit burned brighter than ever. Across the fleet, soldiers wept for the fallen and embraced those who lived. They knew they had faced the strongest force the Empire could gather, and they had endured. On the bridge of the human flagship Resolute, Admiral Hayes stood in silence, staring at the wreckage. His officers waited, expecting him to speak. Last, his voice came quiet but filled with steel. "This is not the end," he said. "This is the beginning. Today, the galaxy has seen that the Empire can bleed, and if it can bleed, it can fall." The word spread across the fleet like fire. Cheers and cries of victory echoed through every ship. For the first time in living memory, hope was louder than fear. Far away, on the Emperor's throne world, the news of the defeat reached the palace. The court was silent as the report was read. The Emperor, seated high on his throne of black stone, clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. His voice trembled, though he tried to hide it. "You mean," he whispered, "that wasn't their full force?" No one answered. No one dared. The silence was enough. The Emperor, who had ruled for centuries without challenge, felt something he had not felt in all his reign: fear. For the first time, he realized the truth. The humans had fought him with only part of their strength, and even then, they had shattered his armadas. If they gathered all their colonies, all their fleets, and all their allies, what storm would they unleash? Whispers spread across the Empire like a disease. Admirals who once spoke proudly now avoided each other's eyes. Soldiers who had marched without question now doubted. Citizens, long taught to believe the Empire was eternal, now wondered if its fall had begun. Meanwhile, in human space, preparations continued. The victory at Proxima had been costly, but it had united humanity as never before. Colonies sent reinforcements, shipyards worked without rest, and new alliances formed every day. Former slaves of the Empire now flew proudly beside human fleets, their voices declaring freedom for the first time in generations. On Earth, families mourned their dead, but they did so with pride. Mothers told their children, "Your father died for a future where you will be free." Sons and daughters pledged that they would take up the mantle if needed. The spirit of resistance had become unbreakable. Admiral Hayes stood before the United Council of Humans and Allies. His face was tired, but his eyes carried the weight of destiny. "The Empire believed we would kneel," he said. "Instead, we have stood. They believed this war would end in our destruction. Instead, it has only made us stronger. We fight not just for Earth, not just for our colonies, but for every world that dreams of freedom. And together we will not stop until the stars are free." The chamber erupted in thunderous applause. It was no longer only a human war. It was a galactic war for liberation. The Empire had thought it could frighten humanity into submission. Instead, it had awakened something greater, an unyielding storm that would sweep across the stars, and so the galaxy changed forever. Where once there was only silence under the rule of the Empire, now there was a voice rising, clear and unstoppable. It was the voice of humanity, declaring to all, "We will not kneel, we will not break, we will fight, and we will win." The Emperor sat alone on his throne, the echoes of defeat surrounding him. For the first time, he understood the truth. The humans were not weak, they were not fragile. Humanity was the storm.